This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcast, digital, and all forms of news publishing.
And greetings once again, Mike Linder, publisher of E&P Magazine. If you are watching the screen, you're seeing lots of faces right now. But before we get to our interview, quick housekeeping. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, please follow us, watching us on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button below, hit the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Joining me from the E&P Magazine side is my business partner, our editor-in-chief, and yes, my wife, Robin. Welcome to the program today. Robin and I just recently moved to Nashville, Tennessee. Some of you have seen that in our posts. I reached out to the regional editor of USA Today, the editor of the Tennessean, my hometown newspaper, Michael Anastasi. But you have covered, your newsroom has covered a number of different stories that have been. Robin, why don't you quickly run down the list real quick of what we'd like to talk about that has happened in pretty much the last 30 days here in Nashville?
Well, I don't know if I've got even the complete list, but I think probably topping it has been the Covenant school shooting. In the wake of that, the anti-gun protest, or the protest period, all of the lovely things that are going on in the Tennessee legislature, along with the expulsions and kind of the answer to that. You've also had I guess you would call anti-LGBTQ legislation going through, the drag show bill passing, things like that. And then finally, just the last few days, the Louisville shooting. I mean, and I know I'm missing stuff.
Franklin, Tennessee, right?
Yeah.
Now debating whether or not they're going to have an LGBTQ fair. This is all getting national attention, and we have a lot of members of the newsroom that we're going to chat with about this, and we'll do that on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is exclusively sponsored by Blocks Digital, formerly Town News. Even though the name has changed, their commitment to the media industry is as strong as ever. Blocks Digital is now even better positioned to deliver integrated solutions like content management, audience development, advertising revenue, video management, and more. Join the over 2,000 news publishers worldwide that power their ongoing digital transformation with Blocks Digital, serving over 141 million monthly users who view over 6.5 billion pages of content each year. You can trust Blocks Digital to empower you, to connect you at scale with the community you need to reach. Blocks Digital, formerly Town News, now reimagined to help meet the news publishing challenges of tomorrow and beyond. Learn more at blocksdigital.com.
All right, we got a pretty full group here for this interview today. I'm surprised, Michael, that you actually have anyone staffing your newsroom right now, because on the screen we've got, besides obviously Michael Anastasi, the editor of the Tennessean, been there for, I hope I got it right from your LinkedIn profile, 7 years. We have Gary Estwick, the breaking news editor. We've got Liz Schubauer, content strategist. Ben Goad, news director. Dwayne Gang, politics and investigation editor. We have Erica Whitney, director of multimedia projects. We have Jeremy Harmon, visuals director. Welcome, gang. You don't have to speak at once, but the topic today is how you guys are keeping your sanity with so much going on and keeping the operation going with all this. So let's first start with you, Michael. Obviously, you got major national attention just recently with, again, something that's become almost a day-to-day phenomenon, if not weekly, which is a mass shooting here in Nashville. Michael, quickly set the stage. How did you put the team into action, and who on your team would you like to talk with, or give us some perspective on how you immediately handled this coverage?
I would first like to add to that list that Robin introduced us with earlier. Before we had the mass shooting, we had a series of tornadoes over the weekend in Mississippi.
Yes.
that impacted our region, as well as tornadoes that swept through Tennessee itself later in the week. And those actually left 15 dead. And so that was also a very large story for us. And then the weekend, over the weekend following, we had the CMT Awards out of Austin,
Right.
Texas. We had a team there. And of course, Nashville being the home of country music, that's a very big tentpole event for us. So it was one thing after another with our staff deployed across multiple states, multiple cities. And we used every single person that we have on our roster. One thing to keep in mind about this team, though, Mike and Robin, is that we have covered multiple major natural disasters in Nashville just over the last few years. Everything from tornadoes that struck Nashville and were quite devastating in March of 2020. To the Christmas Day bombing that everyone, I think, recalls later that year. So major breaking news is nothing new for us. And this team is experienced and knows how to respond in the moment immediately with a swarming effect. Our frontline people, of course, would be Ben Goad, who is our news director. He's in charge of our day-to-day operations of our newsroom. Gary is our breaking news editor, as you mentioned, as well as Liz Schubauer, who works with Gary. They're going to be the point of the spear, along with our visuals people, of course, on any major breaking story. And so I would turn it over to Ben at this point to talk a little bit about those first few minutes.
Absolutely. And before I do, I will add even another news event to that lengthy list here, because I don't think anyone has mentioned that 2 Black Hawk helicopters crashed on that first weekend in the middle of us covering the aftermath of the shooting, killing several people. And so we had to dispatch teams out to that site in Southern Kentucky as well. So we were, as Mike said, across many cities, many states, all at once, covering many national stories. And it was an all-out sprint. You know, we certainly, as Mike says, are no stranger to big breaking news, but to have all of those things all at once in succession was a lot of adrenaline. And every sports writer was involved. Every dining writer was involved in this coverage. This was not for just our hard news, our breaking news people. Our music writers were involved in this coverage too. So it was an all hands on deck situation. And you know what we had to think about throughout those first days is knowing that adrenaline would at some point run out. And while it is a sprint in the beginning, these stories, particularly the shooting and aftermath, will be with us all year and beyond. So in reality, it's a marathon. So as we're doing this work, you know, I think for us, we're thinking about how we can give our writers rest and the ability to reconcile within themselves what's happened, because unlike a lot of breaking news stories, this one certainly was a difficult one for many people to grapple with personally. So we have to think about that, and while all the while doing the blocking and tackling of the coverage itself. And you know, for that, I guess I would throw to Liz and Gary, who were most intimately involved with directing that coverage. So I guess I would throw to Gary.
Thank you. I think, and we haven't talked about this as a newsroom, I think I received the first call from our former breaking reporter who's transitioning to a job on the education beat, Rachel Wegner. And in that moment, I had just a couple of seconds to figure out, what are we going to do? not just how we're going to cover this, but how we're going to keep our people safe. You know, our most important asset for the company. So, and it moved so fast, and you know, those first couple of minutes, we're not exactly sure if this is really happening. That's and that's probably what I remember the most. That period between where we think something's going on and we're trying to confirm it, but we have to put resources in place even if it's not, because we can't wait until we confirm it, because then it may be too late. That is one thing that really stands out to me. And then in those minutes after, so many other reporters, editors, photographers, and other support staff jump on, and we just tackle this like a village.
Liz?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Michael, Ben, and Gary have said. It really does, you know, at that initial point, you kind of go into that blocking and tackling mode of, you know, as the situation is evolving, you know, we eventually hear where the families are going and get photo and reporters out there. We hear homes that law enforcement are searching and figure out where that is. And you kind of have people in the field, you've got people in the office taking in the information, you've got people in the office combing social media, looking for the next tip, and just kind of, you know, trying to get your arms around what is happening in those first moments. And then, you know, as that starts to wind down, you move on to, you know, the days and weeks of coverage of how the community is impacted in a long term. And unfortunately, we've, you know, had quite a bit of experience with this to where it's, you know, we're starting to, you know, have playbooks that we've developed from the Christmas Day bombing a few years ago, from the floods in Waverly, where you start to kind of feel like what are the things we need to make sure that we're keeping track of and following in the long term.
I just want to get an idea of how Gary, Liz, and Ben, are you guys physically in the same building? Do you guys still work? Do you actually get into a conference room together? Are you using some form of, I mean, how did the three of you start assigning people and getting all the things together? Are you communicating via some form of a chat box? What are you doing? I mean, how are the three of you making that newsroom, you know, all hands on deck working?
Right. Well, that's a challenge that we've grown accustomed to, in large part because of the COVID pandemic. We at the Tennessean, like many places, are on a hybrid office model. So we are here a few days a week and remote a few days a week. Monday morning on the 27th, we were remote. So that added a layer of another higher level of difficulty to the situation, because we're not all in the same room and able to direct people to hospitals and schools and staging areas and whatnot. So, but we have gotten fairly good, I'd say very good, at being able to dispatch. Our primary mode of communication is Teams chat, and we instantly had a separate discussion dedicated to what is happening and who is doing what. And by the end, that chat is still going today, and I think there's something like 60 people in there now from all over our company. But that is the way that we communicate, and that Liz and Gary and I probably, and Dwayne and Jeremy and Erica and everyone here, and then some, probably had about 10,000 phone calls that day as well. And then after that, once we got into a place where everyone moved into the office, and we spent the rest of the week in person, because that is a more ideal situation.
Robin?
Well, I just, first of all, I wanted to also recognize Jeremy, because I think the Tennessean, your visuals are amazing. And I wanted to find out, I was really touched by the way you guys covered that next Sunday. And Michael kind of gave us a heads up about this, that you guys were all going to be, you all went to different, not just you guys, but everybody on your staff went to different churches around Nashville. And I think that that was such an amazing way to cover the aftermath of this, because I mean, you can throw a rock in Nashville and hit a church. I mean, there's one in every corner. How did you guys, how did you guys come up with this? How did you, how did you make this happen? It must have been very difficult.
Well, from the photo side on that one, we really worked the reporters who kind of spearheaded that project after Anastasia gave us the idea for this. They focused it on some churches that just from our experiences with them and their relevance to the story, that we thought would be these are the places where we definitely want our visual staff. Yeah, and so we got that all worked out with the churches in advance. We went, there were a lot of conversations with our folks about for lack of a better way of saying it, like respecting the solemnness of this moment.
Right.
Like we want to, we need to be there. We need to record this, but we aren't the out of town media who parachutes in for this kind of stuff. Like we're going to be living with this. All of us are going to be living with this story for a really long time, and we're part of the community as well. And so we need to approach it as such. And I think that kind of approach and philosophy, I think, has really guided a lot of what we've done on all these different stories. Because we're really prioritizing not just the coverage, but like the mental and physical well-being of the staff, right? Like the news has been so unrelenting, and so it's really important to make sure that we're working with our staff in a way that they're in the spots they need to be. We're getting the coverage we need to get, but we're also not just like completely exhausting everybody and grinding them down, because then they're not going to be in a position where they can work, right? The day of the Covenant shooting, I was out of town. Like it was spring break for my kids, and so we weren't even in the state. And I'm standing in a museum somewhere when my phone starts blowing up, and there wasn't a lot I could do in the moment because I'm away. But as the day was going on, I had so many conversations with the crew about where they were, what they were seeing, how they were doing. And it's just really just trying to connect with everybody and make sure that they had the staff who's in the field, that they have all the support they need from us back in the office, so to speak.
And Eric, I wanted to give you a compliment. We think the Tennessean is doing an amazing job with all your multimedia, and I know you're thin-staffed like all of us in this industry. What makes you different? And this is just because you're in charge of multimedia. Then all the television coverage. I mean, whenever there's a major story, I'm a news junkie. I immediately start watching multiple networks on my screens, and then watching how they're shooting to their local affiliates here. And then you're competing with all that, cable news stuff going on. When you're representing the USA Today network as well as the Tennessean, how do you position us, this industry, against all that other, here's the helicopter flying, here's this. Just where's your brain, and what makes us different, and how do you do all that amazing work? How do you think about our industry compared to the, the video shoots and cable news ecosystem?
For sure. So part of my responsibilities is leading our audience team, which is a group of about 15 journalists, mostly remote, spread out across the South region. And we focus on off-platform and on-platform, so social media and our site. And we look at it through the lens of meeting the audience where they're at. So TV, they have the streams, they have their live coverage, but we really hone in on ensuring that our coverage and the assets that we're using to promote it and inform our community are tailored to where different demographics, different segments of our community are at, right? We've focused heavily on Instagram, on TikTok. And those are platforms that I would say overall traditionally that some legacy media organizations have ignored or just now dipping their toe into. But we've really made the push to the shooting, for example, had a lot of young folks interested, as we saw in the demonstrations at the Capitol. And where are those folks? They're probably not waking up and going to the Tennessean.com. They probably don't have cable television and are looking at TV. So that's why we thought TikTok and Instagram was an important platform to ensure that we're showing video, showing our amazing visuals that we were getting from Jeremy's team, and keeping folks informed in a way that makes sense to them. So like I said, this younger community, this younger demographic, they might not be our readers yet, but this is still a story that they're interested in and that personally impacts them, right? They're wondering if it's their school next. So we wanted to make sure that even though they're not in the habit of going to Tennessean.com to get their news, that we were still providing the news to them in a way that makes sense for them.
Dwayne, politics editor, did you know that we were going to have this second romp into the world of national news on the day that they just started, that huge protest came to the state? Because that came out of nowhere. I mean, suddenly I'm just watching my phone light up and I'm turning on networks that are just starting to figure out that Nashville has become the second. I mean, this is a political issue, right? I mean, these guys, wasn't that supposed to happen under the radar, right? Wasn't our state let's toss these three people out, move on, because that's how states work. It never gets any national attention. And suddenly, did you know this was going to happen, or would this come out of the blue, Dwayne?
There was already a lot of national media and national attention on Nashville in the wake of the shooting. So you already had a lot of national attention on our community in the wake of the shooting and covering the protests and the demonstrations calling for gun control up at the Capitol. And so it was quite remarkable to see these three lawmakers, two in particular, they went to the House floor, they pulled out a bullhorn, and they started leading the gallery in chants for gun control. They did break House rules in doing so. And, we kind of thought, okay, these two young lawmakers in particular, they came from activist circles. That's their career. That's how they got their start in politics. And a lot of us thought, okay, that's kind of on message for how they work. So we weren't quite sure exactly what would happen in the wake of that. And then we started hearing that like some punishment would come down. And then the following Monday, the House Speaker, they announced that they stripped several of them of their committee assignments. And we thought, okay, maybe that's going to be the punishment. But then that evening, they introduced resolutions to expel the three lawmakers. And at that point, it really did kind of take on a life of its own. And I think even surprised me a little bit, having covered and followed Tennessee politics for a couple decades, about the speed in which the Republican supermajority moved to act to punish these three lawmakers. It's pretty historic. It happened a few other times since the 1800s. There was an expulsion in 2016 from a lawmaker accused of sexual misconduct. And in 1980, they expelled someone for accepting a bribe. And before that, it was 1866, they expelled some lawmakers for trying to block Tennessee's passage of the 14th Amendment. So it was quite extraordinary. And then the following Thursday, we had hours of debate where these two lawmakers held court. And they were really able to kind of and get their message across far more effectively than they probably ever could have as freshman lawmakers. So in many respects, this kind of took on even more high profile in the national spotlight, because they were holding court on national television for 6 hours on a Thursday afternoon as lawmakers debated expelling these two lawmakers, really kind of putting the spotlight back on to the shooting. And so it was an extraordinary set of politics. And then, they got reappointed. So one of them didn't even miss an actual day of legislative session because the city council here in Nashville quickly moved to reappoint him as an interim basis. So it was quite extraordinary, really, truly historic moment in Tennessee politics.
Dwayne, even before that happened, I mean, that was a historic day, but you've been dealing with and seeing a lot of pretty amazing bills being passed. A lot of, I'm sure, quite more demonstrations than are usual with a lot of the LGBTQ bills that are being passed. Do you see this, I guess, quote unquote, dying down, or do you just see this as a tipping point for going forward?
I don't necessarily see the culture issues dying down. This is kind of something that you're starting to see play out in legislatures across the country. And I think Tennessee is front and center of that, where you have Republican lawmakers in particular from their perspective, really focusing in on a lot of the culture issues that really drive and motivate their base of voters. And Tennessee is seeing that. So we have a supermajority here. A lot of the competitive races are primaries on both sides of the aisle. And so you really see some of that playing out in our legislature. And you're seeing it elsewhere too. I mean, there's been some political retribution toward members of the minority party in other states where both Democrats and Republicans hold supermajorities. But Tennessee really is front and center on this. We've been front and center on a lot of the LGBTQ bills, particularly our bill that would severely restrict drag shows and drag performances in Tennessee, although a judge has temporarily put that on hold for the moment. We've seen it with our very strict abortion ban in this state, although the state just recently passed some small exceptions to that total abortion ban. But Tennessee really increasingly in the last few years has been at the forefront of a lot of this debate nationally about how these issues are playing out at the state level.
Michael, let's discuss the parent company for a second, if we may. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you are working for a company that sometimes gets a little, negative press, slashing, the game. You're pro, you've been in this industry for many, many years. You've held top editorial positions. You're running a team. Your brand you're working for now is won Pulitzer Prizes. How do you keep the morale high? Has that been a challenge? Am I asking a non sequitur question? The morale is always high on your team.
What's
going on?
I think here in Nashville, to be quite honest with you, the morale of this newsroom is the highest of any newsroom I've worked with in a 35-year plus career. So I think that's in no small part due to the leaders who are speaking with you today, and the way we run things here and the way we keep our folks focused on the journalism and the support that we've had from our colleagues throughout the company. But you're right to suggest that morale is an issue in our industry. It certainly is. Everyone knows the numbers that we've been seeing over the last few years, and the answer to that is for us to continue our transformation as an industry so that we can become a growing, thriving, stable business. And that is the 100% focus of not only folks like me who are managing newsrooms throughout the USA Today network, but those colleagues of ours at corporate throughout the C-suite, our colleagues at USA Today, and that's all we think about and focus on.
I'm going to ask a final question. How do you keep your head in the game with all the cable news chatter going on around your city, and suddenly the stories just get talked about and talked about and talked about, and your mission is to keep your head in the game, right? And then suddenly you get CNN saying this and Fox is saying that, and MSNBC is saying this. Suddenly you're seeing reporters, interview reporters, and suddenly it turns into opinion. And you're trying to do journalism. How do you keep your head in the game and your team in the game? Are they constantly have one ear going to the what do they call it, the cable echo chambers? I mean, how do you stay in the right lane of doing balanced journalism in this world?
I love the question. You can't write what you don't read. That is the short answer. So, you know, we have a room full of journalists that we were just talking about this yesterday to some students from Vanderbilt that visited our newsroom. Back when I was a sports writer, I would read 5 different game stories and 5 different reporters. Same thing as when I might turn on if there is TV news, I might turn on the news to see how is a newscast, what's leading a newscast. When you can do that and kind of separate who's the better reporter, who's the better writer, what's the storytelling, I think it allows you to see the creativity, you know, because what we do is an art. It allows you to try to figure out how can we best tell stories, and that is totally the reason why we are the best storytellers in Tennessee.
Ooh, I love that. We're going to leave it at that thought, if that's okay. I want to thank Michael Anastasi, the editor of the Tennessean, also your second title, regional editor for USA Network. Gary Estwick, breaking news editor. Liz Schubauer, content strategist and city editor. Ben Goad, news director. Dwayne Gang, politics and investigation editor. Erica Whitney, director of multimedia projects. Jeremy, last but not least, Jeremy Harmon, visuals director, who got interrupted during his holiday break to be on top of all the hard news that's going on here in Nashville. Thank you all for your valuable time. You guys keep up the good fight. And thanks very much for sharing your story with all of us here at ENP.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.